So while you're in Chicago this weekend, I hope you get a chance to walk around outside, and maybe you can imagine what Chicago would look like if it were an Olympic city. Obviously this is now hypothetical, because in October of '09, Chicago came in 4th place out of 4 finalists to host the 2016 Summer Olympics. So, judging from the city's baseball teams, they shouldn't have been too surprised. So while I was in Chicago in the spring of '09, when the city was really gearing up in terms of somewhat of a PR blitz to pitch the bid to its residents and to the International Olympic Committee, who would choose the host city. So it was a pretty exciting time to be thinking about the Olympics, and so I chose to cover them for my independent study project for the semester. And just a brief introduction, I did the ACM Urban Studies program, and one particular aspect of that program that I think influenced the way my project has informed it informed the way I read the project and my research, was the fact that we were not on a campus. Our only campus was the building where we'll be tomorrow, which is just 1 floor of an office. And so as I introduced myself as a student to those I was meeting with for my research, I was a student of the ACM and of St. Olaf, but I was more a student, I felt, of the city and an engaged citizen of the city. And I think that really changed the way that I read, and that research personally impacted my life. That's because we were living in the city. Okay, so a brief timeline. Chicago. All right, sorry about that. So Chicago began in April of '07 when it was chosen as the U.S. host city, and then in 2008 they became one of 4 finalists, and then of course in October of '09 they came in 4th. But in April 2009, where I was here, the International Olympic Committee also visited. So in my presentation, I ended up focusing on the Chicago bid, with a particular focus on how it fits into ongoing Olympic problems with human rights, and particularly housing rights is what I'll talk about here. I gave a longer presentation, but this will be much shorter. And briefly, but as I talked, part of the appeal of the Olympics is not just to be a global celebration of sport, but it's also a big moneymaker. As we know, NBC covers the Olympics, and all the advertising revenue goes to NBC, but it also, NBC has to pay for that contract, and that goes to the International Olympic Committee. So the International Olympic Committee is looking for a city that is going to generate a lot of money, that's going to be very internationally appealing, and people are going to want to watch it and think about it. And the appeal for the city is not that they get those direct revenue, but that they get associated tourism and then business investment in the lead up to the games as well as afterward. So that there's a projection up there so that projects that from the bid's own economists that the city would receive about $14 billion in associated incremental economic benefit. And that's primarily business and tourism and jobs created by development. But the offshoot of that is that a lot of that business and economic development is focused on the downtown core, and especially with tourism, and also with business investment. Unless those businesses that are participating in the build-up to the games are Chicago-based and are community-based, they're probably not going to benefit Chicagoans. They're going to benefit even multinational companies. So again, I looked at previous Olympics to kind of because I was considering Chicago 7 years before the Olympics would happen, but we often hear about human rights issues as the Olympics are happening. Obviously, in the recent Vancouver Olympics, there was a little bit of talk about the infringement on native lands, but at the same time, even while homelessness was supposed to be a focus of the games, that doubled in the time from when they received the bid to last February when the games happened. And most egregiously in Beijing, about 1.5 million people were displaced by development for the games. And a lot of this was probably going to happen anyway, but the games certainly accelerated it. And there are other examples there. And a lot of that information I received from an organization in Switzerland that studies housing rights. And I used one of their conclusions to inform my perspective in Chicago, which was that communities and governments that are and corporations that are putting together the bid should strive to work with the communities rather than for them or even against them in terms of specifically housing rights. So you can go ahead and scroll down. So that document that you can't really read very well there is a copy of the Community Benefits Ordinance that was developed by community groups in Chicago in 2008, and then this is the January 2009 version. But a community benefits agreement, briefly, is generally a legally binding contract between community groups, a corporation, and then a city government. In this case, the corporation would be the bid committee, the government would be Chicago, and then community groups, a coalition of community groups formed the community aspect. And a benefits agreement essentially holds that if a corporation wants to come in and pursue a major development in an area, and they have to fulfill certain requirements that the community wishes in exchange for public benefits and city allowance to happen. So the city is the enforcement agency in that sense. So this was developed with several stipulations to ensure that communities would be proactive about development, especially because the Olympic budget would be up $4 billion, and all this is happening in about 7 years. And to make sure that money is allocated fairly, especially in the communities where the developments were going to happen, because a lot of these developments were in lower income neighborhoods. As you see at the end of my presentation, there's a photo of the park where the Olympic Stadium would have been placed, and that's in one of the most poor areas of Chicago and one of the most needed economic development. But it would be crucial that that economic development happened responsibly. And so just to jump back up, some of the key provisions relating to housing rights would be provisions against displacement and ensuring that 30% of the Olympic Village would remain affordable afterward, and there's a variety of other issues that are in there as well. Eventually, of course, this community benefits agreement was, in my opinion, kind of weakened and turned when it was actually approved by the City Council and called a Memorandum of Understanding. So there were questions whether or not it was actually legally binding, and of course the community benefits language got taken out. So it was more palatable to the corporate interests, perhaps. And of course, then Chicago didn't get the bid, so it's not a reality. But these development issues are still going on in Chicago, and I think the community benefits tool is something that is useful for considering development in Chicago, as well as development in other cities, especially relating to mega events like the Olympics, because they happen every 2 years. So that's it. Thank you.